in the female reproductive system, the ovary is the site where a good portion of the development of the eggs happens. From the ovary, the eggs are released at ovulation into the fallopian tube. Now, the ovary and the fallopian tube aren't actually attached, but the eggs are released and generally go into the fallopian tube, which they can follow down to the uterus. The uterus is where the egg will implant and begin to develop. After development, the birth canal is also called the vagina. And that is also the site where the penis inserts during sexual intercourse. So taking a closer look at the ovary itself. The ovary is filled with eggs that are in early developmental stages. The eggs are actually made, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, prior to birth, all the eggs you're ever going to have. And then once a month, one of the eggs or a couple of the eggs will be stimulated to develop further. They get bigger, and you can see the oocyte, or the egg, is in the middle, and it's surrounded by follicles, which are kind of sac-like structures, cells, really, that form a nutrient sac around the eggs. This continues to get larger until the egg is released or ovulated from the follicle. After ovulation, the follicular cells form what's called the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum is present to make progesterone, mostly, and that's preparing the uterus for implantation of that egg should it be fertilized. If pregnancy doesn't happen, implantation doesn't happen, the corpus luteum will degenerate, and the next month you'll start that cycle all over again. If pregnancy occurs and the fertilized egg is implanted, this corpus luteum gets bigger and bigger and continues making those hormones to keep the pregnancy continuing. So here's a closer picture where you can see the ovaries with the eggs maturing, the fallopian tube where the egg can be released at ovulation, the uterus, and the vagina. So let's talk about the eggs for a second. And you can really talk about egg production, or oogenesis, in terms of what's happening in meiosis of the egg, and in terms of what's happening in the follicle around the outside to protect the egg. So prior to birth, a stem cell called the oogonium goes through mitosis and makes a whole bunch of primary oocytes. So at birth, you have a large number of these primary oocytes, and they're surrounded by a small follicle, some of those nutrient cells. After birth, every month from the beginning of puberty through menopause, one of those eggs is chosen, and it will increase in size, and the follicular cells around it will help continue to provide nutrients. At this time, prior to ovulation, meiosis happens and the cell divides. Really, most of all the cytoplasm of the cell, one cell, is kept in the egg. But it doesn't complete the next division of meiosis until after fertilization. So the complete divisions of meiosis don't happen until after a sperm has actually come in and fertilized the egg. So the hormones, you know that the hormones, follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, are made in the pituitary. They're released into the bloodstream, and the blood levels of follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone peak at about mid-cycle. This is the time of ovulation. You remember that luteinizing hormone is involved in preparation of hormones or stimulation of hormone growth, whereas follicle stimulating hormone is involved in stimulation of egg growth. You see a spike in estrogen right about the time of ovulation, just prior to ovulation. You see a big spike in progesterone after ovulation, which is what's being produced by the corpus luteum, which is the follicular cells that were left after ovulation. So we can really talk about two different cycles that happens in female reproduction. The first is what's happening in the ovary, or the ovarian cycle. This is every month, the one egg, the primary follicle that gets bigger. The follicular cells around it get bigger. At mid-month, that egg is ovulated into the fallopian tubes. The follicular cells stay behind and form the corpus luteum that's making all of that progesterone. At the end of the month, if and the oocyte has not been fertilized and implanted in the uterus, then that corpus luteum degenerates and a new primary follicle is chosen. You start the cycle all over again. You can also talk about the uterine cycle. This is what's happening in the uterus that you most commonly see at the end of the cycle as menstruation. So through the month, if you just look at sort of the end of the month, the endometrial layers, all of the layers of the uterus are plumping up, getting lots of nutrients to prepare for implantation of the embryo and being able to provide it nutrients through development. So the layers proliferate. The proliferative phase is you get lots more layers, and then the secretory phase is they make lots of nutrients, get lots of blood vessels in there. If implantation doesn't occur, progesterone levels start to go down, and those decreasing progesterone levels can't maintain this large endometrial layers. So in fact, all of that is sloughed off. The outer layers that have been plumped up during the proliferative and the secretory phase are discarded as menstrual flow. So the follicular cells that are around the oocyte can produce estrogens, and estrogens cause secondary sex characteristics, including development of breasts, appearance of pubic hair, the increase in amount of fat under the skin, widening of the pelvis that happens at puberty, and the onset of menses. Progesterone, which is produced by the corpus luteum, which is the follicular cells left after ovulation, that progesterone helps the secretory phase of the uterine cycle to really plump up and get ready for pregnancy. And if, in fact, the egg is implanted, it helps maintain that pregnancy